Welcome to Global Innovation. I'm your host, Chris Graham. Growth, with all of its benefits, comes with a cost. The tech boom throughout the San Francisco Bay Area has created a surge in traffic, a shortage of housing, and strains on essential services. Our show today will look at the interplay between the culture of innovation and technology and regional plans for growth and development. Joining us for this discussion are Darien and Louie, the Executive Director of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance, and Ed DelBaccaro, the organization's Vice Chair. Now, Darien, who has over 40 years of experience in program development and community investment, will help us understand how the East Bay addresses a diverse business ecosystem that includes biotech, manufacturing, equipment, financial, educational, and technology. Ed, who's also the Managing Director of the commercial real estate firm Transwestern, will provide his thoughts on current trends and future plans in the East Bay for corporate offices, manufacturing space, and housing availability. So let's get started. Darien, Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, to put the discussion in context, why don't you tell us a little bit about the East Bay Development Alliance and what it does, its partnerships?
Great. Our organization, the East Bay Economic Development Alliance, is about 26 years old, and we actually started as an advisory committee to the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. They charged us to have a public-private partnership to address some of the regional economic development issues. So we started off addressing things like the base closures and the port dredging problem. And now we've evolved into an organization that's a nonprofit, 501c3, and we support the cities, the counties, and the businesses of Alameda and Contra Costa County. So we now provide services to both counties of the East Bay.
So we've seen a great deal of growth throughout the Bay Area. I want to focus on the East Bay and the problems that are particular to the East Bay, and what is the state of the East Bay at this time?
Well, the state of the East Bay is quite healthy. Because of the recent surge of technology, bio, that's generating in San Francisco and the Silicon Valley, and the extreme cost that have increased in those areas, we're seeing kind of a natural organic flow to the East Bay. People are discovering that you can do business more efficiently and less expensively in the East Bay. We have a great, goods movement infrastructure, and it's a great place to live. So housing costs, commercial real estate costs are more reasonable for businesses, whether you're a startup or whether you're an established business. So we're seeing some organic growth coming our way.
And Ed, your specialty is real estate, so I want to focus on that just for a moment. Talk to us a little bit about some of the issues facing the East Bay in terms of housing, manufacturing facilities, office space, because we've seen in the Peninsula, San Francisco, and San Jose different market effects of the tech boom. So what's going on in the East Bay?
Well, as Darien mentioned, the East Bay is one of the major job million people. We're approaching 2.5 million people. And we're 80,000 population rather, but we're also going to be adding almost another 300,000 people in the next 9 years. That reflects job creation. So if you look at real estate as a box that houses economic activity, so anytime our import-export dynamics increase, trade, anytime Tesla opens up another factory, or all the biotech firms that are in Emeryville, South San Francisco, the East Bay grows, and because we have most of the land. So we are categorically growing. I mean, we have over 330 million feet of real estate space throughout the East Bay alone. Vacancy rates are low. You're seeing construction and industrial. You're seeing medical construction, which is a major generator in our area. Now, part of the problem is we're actually growing faster and adding jobs faster than we're building roads, infrastructure, schools, and especially housing. And I can go into that a little bit later.
So there is a jobs housing imbalance. And is that going to get better or worse?
There is a gross housing imbalance. So throughout California, and very specifically in the cities that are growing, such as the whole Bay Area, there is a dramatic housing balance. So for instance, as you drive around, you hear about a lot of projects being approved, but in the East Bay, there's actually only 300,000 apartment units being built as we speak. There's several more thousand in the pipeline. But our deficit per year is 15,000 units. And that, if you look at the curve, where we're going to be adding all those people and jobs in the next 5 to 7 years, our housing is not keeping up. So whether it's your staff person, housing in general, student housing, you're seeing dramatic rent increases and dramatic housing increases, which then results in people commuting further and further away into the job center.
And so are we looking mostly at multifamily residential development?
There's a couple major shifts in how the Bay Area has grown. So if you went back in the 80s and 90s, the suburban growth ring was the major job center. So that's when all the major banks, insurance companies, oil companies, Chevron, B of A, for instance, moved out to the suburbs. And then there was a great housing boom in the suburbs and a lot of single-family homes. Now you go back to the 2000s and it's tech, biotech, life sciences, and related industries, maker tech. Those are interbay jobs, so there's much less land, so therefore the pressure to build their BART stations, transit stations, so that tends to be apartments. So the crying need now, and since housing is so expensive, you can go into average communities and starter homes are $900,000, $800,000. You just can't afford that. So apartments then are the answer, but then we're not building enough apartments fast enough.
And how does that impact the decision where developers will build either Class A office space or manufacturing facilities?
That's a very good question. Ironically, suburban office rents in the East Bay, except for maybe Oakland and Berkeley and Emeryville, are not high enough to build new office buildings. They're certainly high enough to build new medical buildings. They're certainly high enough to build tech buildings, R&D buildings. San Francisco can afford to build new office buildings because their rents are high enough in San Mateo, Silicon Valley. In our area, that's why most of the construction is apartments, because people commute to either Silicon Valley or commuting, as Darien said, to San Francisco. We will get our share of new construction, but it's mostly in warehouse, logistics, and housing.
And Darien, with some of these issues, which are long-standing and will take a lot of thought to solve, how does the East Bay approach attracting new businesses to the area?
There are a couple of ways. So we have a company like Tesla that has a great need for supply chain. So we're seeing companies looking at being closer to, as a supplier, being closer to the company. So for those companies, we work with the cities and really market the East Bay. So a company may have a need for locating their site in one city and drawing their employees from another city and having their executives live in another city. And all of our cities as an ecosystem have something to offer. So we market the entire region for them. The pipeline to the Port of Oakland, the pipeline to companies such like Tesla or companies where you have to be off a goods transit system is very important. So certain cities may be attractive for certain companies depending on their needs. We also have diversity in our region. So we have spaces that are clusters for biotech, like Ed said, Emeryville, Berkeley, where they want to be close to the University of California, or companies that want to be close to our 3 national labs. And we're one of the only regions that has 3 national laboratories in the United States. So depending on the company's needs, we really market the assets of the East Bay where they can be close to for various reasons.
And those national labs are primarily funded by the federal government?
And they're also right now sharing a large grant focused on energy. So they are dedicated to creating the commercialization for some of their technology. So we have a Livermore Open Campus with the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. UC Berkeley supports an incubator in Berkeley. And so there's a lot of collaboration between those research centers and the companies that spin off from it.
Okay, so in a regional setting, we have a number of different stakeholders in terms of political organizations. We have the state. To some extent, we have the federal government. We have the different cities and local municipalities. How do you see the collaboration between all these different stakeholders with their different interests? We know that in the federal government, one department won't talk to another sometimes. How do you manage it in the region of the East Bay?
Well, that's kind of the beauty of our organization. We're a cross-sector organization, which is kind of unusual for an economic development group. So our leadership, by mandate, by our bylaws, has representatives at the county level, elected representatives, county level, city levels. We have city managers represented, the county administrators. And we also have a base of high-level executives and representatives from the business sector. We also bring in labor and environment, K-12 education and post-secondary education. Getting all those people together as a governing arm is not an easy task, but when we have them reach sustainability and answers, it's really powerful. So, for example, Ed leads one of our committees, and that is our Legislation and Advocacy Committee. So they are the committee that vets all of our legislative efforts that promote workforce creation, business development, and infrastructure. Those are the messages that we carry to our elected officials and to our local officials as well for business support. So that's how we work. It is a tall task because collaboration across sectors is not easy, but we have a 26-year history, and that helps position us very well.
Okay, so if we have collaboration amongst political organizations or entities, on the private sector we have business and we have education, and the East Bay has a robust set of educational institutions. There's Cal Berkeley, and there's the community college system, and there's Cal State East Bay, and a number of others. How do you see the business educational, I'll throw this out to both of you, the business educational collaboration working?
I'll take a first stab. First of all, continuing the conversation, the comments that Darien made, one advantage of the East Bay is EDA and then some of the cooperation that we have between the private and public sector. One of the disadvantages is we probably have 50 plus jurisdictions that work the East Bay. So cities don't match their school district lines, don't necessarily match. They're separate from sewer districts, separate from water districts, separate from community college districts, and each city has sometimes sovereign land use rights. So if you're a business, you might be dealing with 5 to 10 organizations in order to get a permit. So that's an issue. On the positive side, the purpose of the Alliance is to bring those people together so they're familiar with each other and try to problem solve. On the negative side is it's a little bit of a Byzantium map in terms of how we approach some of those issues. So over time, is how we solve that becomes a big issue.
We've helped generate a lot of government funding in workforce development in our region, and we're one of the richest regions with Career Pathway Trust grants and Slingshot grants and other grants that come from the state of California or federal resources for workforce development. But these funds all filter through workforce development boards or community colleges. They don't filter through business entities. So although we participate, we have our businesses provide information for curriculum development. We open our doors for field trips. We provide internships. It's not enough. And it's from a perspective with the student being the beneficiary of the efforts. We have an employer advisory committee that places the business as the beneficiary of the effort, which is a little different. So recently we actually hosted a dinner on behalf of Congressman Swalwell, Congressman DeSaulnier, and Congresswoman Barbara Lee. And it was a high-level dinner with great stakeholders in business and education and research about Innovation 2.0. What is that going to look like? What does business have to do in order to push the needle in getting a local workforce created? So there were 3 buckets that we looked at. One was early childhood STEM education. That is cradle to kindergarten. Another one was, what can we do besides internships? We're often asked by educators, provide internship, that's the answer. We even hear that from our national leaders, but we know that's not enough. So we're looking at job shadowing, industry instructors, getting families involved, because we know that families, faith-based organizations, even community organizations are big influencers of students. And lastly, the third bucket we looked at is how can businesses be a champion and a spokesperson to push education? And we're not just talking about 4-year colleges, we're not talking about advanced degrees only, we're also looking at community colleges, regional occupational programs, adult ed, and certificate programs. These are all pathways to well-paying jobs. And we're looking at a local workforce for well-paying jobs and a sustainable workforce that doesn't have to commute 1,000,000 miles to get to work.
Workforce development in the East Bay is one that has a difficult time focusing on one particular area, I would imagine, because you have both the advanced educational requirements of the biotech industry, and then you may have different requirements for either the ports or or the refineries. How does the East Bay address what is really a very different, broken up, different type of workforce?
That's a very good question. So, I mean, the first premise is we have a great economy growing. We're a job creation center of the Western United States. And then you have Silicon Valley, as Darien mentions, all the labs, and a great local economy. So our unemployment rate is relatively low, even to the state and to the nation. But there's so what we're trying to do is how do we address as business and a public sector organization, how do we point out where we could tweak and spotlight those jobs? So for instance, ironically, we have one of our large members, biotech, said, I have no problem finding a PhD to do basic research, but I can't find that person who can calibrate a microscope or set the cultures for the lab. Or we have an unemployment rate of 17 youth unemployment rate, but meanwhile we have a 0.01% unemployment rate with the construction trades in welding. So that's why we're importing people from across the country. So as Darien mentioned, how do we use our local educational systems to evolve faster, to identify where the jobs really are, and how do we identify those sectors that we could probably use job certificates, training, different kinds of courses where the real job needs are today.
And most of the workforce development programs, whether they're through community colleges or through different types of programs, they're all industry focused. So it's not just, skills per se, but they're really focused towards the skills needed in particular industries. And then the other thing is technology is changing everything, right? So you hear the term advanced manufacturing a lot. It's not really an industry, but it's a way of doing work across industries. So what we're really pushing is basic STEM foundation and get you a job in various industries if you're comfortable with a computer, if you have basic math skills, if you can do certain kind of calculations, you'll be fine coming into an entry level in various industries.
So this is where you have to have a different skill set. So in the old days, you're a carpenter and you're framing up a house or framing up a 3-story apartment building. Well, today, if you have prefabricated with computers putting modules on top of modules, you have to connect the conduits, the electric chases, all the plumbing. So you just can't put them on top of each other. So the person who's doing that in the field has to not only have a hammer and nails, has to be able to calibrate attaching systems on top of systems. So a house is now a system, or an apartment unit, or is a modular unit. So the job has just changed, and you just need a different kind of skill set.
So they need CAD software on site.
Literally.
That's why we're, supporting things like Circle Labs in neighborhoods where we have 3D, printing machines, laser cutters, to introduce these kind of basic things. They're now basic things to young people. So we have companies like Google that's promoting it in the Fruitvale area in Oakland. We have Chevron that has a fab lab at one of the high schools in Richmond. And then we have the East Bay STEM Institute through Cal State East Bay here in Hayward that's promoting Circle Labs, and one will be opening up in East Oakland. So these are different approaches that businesses are taking so that they can ensure they have a local workforce.
How are we going to now get the workers from their locations to the jobs now that the East Bay looks more like LA?
Or getting even worse than LA. Even though we're building housing, it takes 2 to 4 years sometimes to get a project approved. So one of the things the Alliance is working on is how do we streamline that process to faster. So even in zoned areas, it takes too long. Then there's litigation involved and things like that. So we have to, first of all, speed up and accelerate the amount of housing. Then some companies are actually being creative, and you're going to see company housing being built. So whether it's a hospital, an education establishment, or Google, are actually considering master leasing apartments or building apartments so that they can house their workers. Because we have, again, a great thing going, but just not enough housing.
And I think companies and even government organizations that have real estate are looking at creative use of the real estate, such as schools. School districts own property. How do they use that property? How do they, a teacher doesn't make enough to own a home in the East Bay. So how do you support that through building something on the properties that you own. So I think you're going to see more of that. I think legislation that recently passed that allowed people to rent out existing rooms in their homes
It's a big deal.
for rental is going to be a big deal. And so I think that's going to help a lot, because as we attract tech, this is going to be the kind of housing that's appealing, and the homeowner's going to need that extra income as well. A lot of times they're aging homeowners that are on a fixed income, and then there are no parking restrictions for that. And we know that.
What Darien was addressing was, during the Depression and recession cycles, you would rent out a room, or you would fix up the unit above the garage or add a cottage. What happened with today's permitting process, you were being required to add a complete new sewer system, and it could be $18,000 to $30,000 to $50,000 to hook up the new unit, as opposed to just attach it like you would do normally. So the law that was passed in the Assembly recently will allow so-called secondary units. And then, as Darien mentioned, that could be several thousand in our area alone. And so that's a good thing. How we streamline permits. So for instance, I was talking about modular construction. City codes still require the old-fashioned review and not CAD review. So the state has approved it, but local jurisdictions have not. So one of our initiatives is how do we streamline these processes to match the 21st century, 22nd century, as opposed to using horse and buggy zoning laws the way we do now.
So there's more consistency from jurisdiction to jurisdiction on the requirements, so developers can plan, builders can plan, and have a smoother process.
Which is not the case today. So that's one of the goals and one of the tweaks in the system.
Another thing that we don't realize, that we really have an aging population in the East Bay. So we have a large part of our population that's aging. They don't need that 3-4 bedroom single family dwelling that they lived in. You'll see a lot of green lighting for senior housing, whether it's home ownership senior housing or subsidized senior housing. You'll see a lot of that on the books, and as they vacate their homes, those are going to open up, and when we have more homes on the market, it does affect the pricing a little bit, but we'll see that kind of movement too. So people are using their real estate. It's their piggy bank. It's their retirement now.
As gentrification occurs, and let's just talk about Oakland just as an example. We have a city that is becoming more attractive to millennials, to the tech community. The neighborhoods are gentrified. There are a lot of positives to gentrification, but it has a negative impact on longtime tenants. We've seen that happening in the Mission in San Francisco. How do we balance the competing needs of or rights of longtime tenants with the new individuals who are moving in, and take into account the concept of highest and best use of real estate?
There's a basic supply and demand problem. So if you limit supply through several measures, meaning it takes too many years to build new housing units, or you have rent control, which discourages new, or you have moratoriums, or you have all these other such litigations where now we have environmental acts that are being warped and they're being used to sue new housing projects. Cities, because of some of the warp nature of how Prop 13 unintended consequence, cities prefer commercial or retail uses because that returns a tax to them. Apartment or housing construction doesn't necessarily pay, so they therefore approve less of that. So the unintended consequence is we're adding jobs, adding population, but we're not adding enough housing. So then that actually accelerates gentrification. So we're going to have change. You can't add 1 million people. You can't have new uses and not change. So you can't have a single family home near a downtown and not expect it to be a 6-story building sooner or later. So the first solution is to provide more housing. If you let developers build too much, then housing prices would be more stable. Since we have land constraints and other things like that, how do we build enough housing or create programs to help those people who are if my rent goes, teacher, Darren's talking about teachers. Teacher makes $70,000, and the apartments are $40,000 a year. There's no mismatch. I mean, that's a mismatch. So how do we build enough units, or create programs to help the average worker, which is 95% of us, afford their house for our kids and workers for the industries.
And I think cities are sensitive about that, and there are issues on the ballot in November to address some of that. To preserve residency for long-time residents in certain neighborhoods. But it's as Ed said, when you have more people coming in, when you have more types of companies coming in, companies demanding certain skill sets, we'll see that change. We'll see some of that change.
By the way, those people are us. So our children.
That's right.
It's
That's
not,
right.
so unless we tell everybody they can't live here and our kids have to move out of the area and we can't have new jobs. I mean, there are cities across the United States that are jealous of our problem. The problem is we have jobs. The problem is that we are increasing the amount of jobs and we're increasing the quality of life here. So people want to move here and stay here. We just have to come together like adults and agree on a process to house them.
The other answer to the problem is we won't need more people moving in for those jobs if the people who are living here can have those jobs. And that's why the big push for creating the local workforce is so important. Companies want people who are familiar with the neighborhoods and where they're situated in. They want people who have less commute. They want people who grew up here and have pride in their neighborhoods. So it behooves them to really invest in local residents and the development of young people for these jobs. So if we have local people filling these jobs, there's less need for, the push of new residents coming in.
So I'm an employer. I've just come into the area, and I need people now. And it's wonderful when you tell me that you're going to solve my problem 5 years from now. I may be out of business 5 years from now. What do I do today?
Well, companies are making those choices every day. I'm the beneficiary as a real estate company in trying to house those companies. But if a company's looking at tech and they have 100 people they want to place, they will, one, is there space for me to move in? Two is, can I afford the workers? And if I can't, I will choose 10 other cities. So certain companies now are seriously looking at one out of the Bay Area. That could be the Greater Bay Area or the Central Valley or Austin. Downtown Detroit is now a tech center. Downtown Pittsburgh and other cities such as that are now attracting some of the tenants that we should have kept here, but we can't house it, or we don't provide the educated worker. So a company makes that decision today, and they do not consider 5 years from now.
Okay, so I want you to put on your crystal ball and really just give me just a few sentences, each one of you, where are we going to be in the East Bay in 10 years?
We're going to be an ecosystem that has a lot of new economy type of work. So we'll have a lot more entrepreneurs. Technology will enable people to do work remotely and do work outside of a regular company structure. And that's going to change the way we live, the way we commute, the way we earn our money, and the way we reinvest our money in consumerism. So that's what I see.
All right. And Ed, 10 years from now?
10 years from now, the Bay Area and the East Bay will be still one of the premier dynamic areas for quality of life, jobs, housing, and families. So it'll actually get better. You'll see certain things out of the Jetsons. So because space is valuable, you will see more dense buildings near some of the BART stations, some transportation, but you'll see some Jetson stuff. So we'll have robot convoy trucks from 2 to 5 in the morning, 20 trucks long, literally 6 inches to a foot apart, that are drone trucks doing deliveries. You'll have drones in about 300 feet above the highway cars, because they'll rent the airspace for deliveries into the apartments and things like that. We'll have chips in everything. So, by the way, cybersecurity will be a big growth industry, but chips in everything to make everything more efficient. And as Darien said, how you get an intelligent worker to work, we'll have all kinds of creative solutions. But the net result will be an amazing area, but we have to just be careful of how we take care of growth.
And the thing that's unique about the East Bay is we are blessed with a lot of natural assets. We have waterfront, we have tremendous open space, we have beautiful weather, and we have cultural diversity and preservation. Those things don't go away no matter what. So those are the things that are going to be uniquely attractive and beneficial to the residents of the East Bay. So that, I think, will set us apart from a lot of places, not only in the greater Bay Area, but in the world.
And
Well
that
said.
and that won't change. Thank you both for being on the show. It's
Thank
exciting to hear what's happening in the East Bay, and we'll have you back in 10 years to see if your prognostications have turned out correctly. This has been Global Innovation, and I am your host, Chris Graham. Thank you for joining us.